on terror, clash of civilizations mentality. The notion, as he said in his State of the Union address, that in this conflict, quote, there is no neutral ground, you are either with us or you're with the terrorists. That's it. You're with us or you're with the terrorists. The problem with that kind of cosmic rhetoric, the problem about thinking of Al-Qaeda as a faceless evil with the power to bring down human civilization as we know it, the problem with thinking of this conflict as though it is a battle between good and evil is that that's exactly how Al-Qaeda thinks about it. In fact, when a reporter from Al Jazeera said to bin Laden, said Bush's words, you're either with us or you're with terrorists, bin Laden said, quote, he took the words right out of my mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know much, but I do know that if you've taken the words out of bin Laden's mouth, you've lost. This cosmic conception is precisely the war that Al-Qaeda is fighting. I'm going to get into that a little bit more clearly in a moment here, because this is a really important issue. And I'll talk about it in just a few moments. But I do want to stop for a moment and talk about the second major problem that the Bush administration in their prosecution of the war on terror. And that is this conception that what we were actually facing was this monolithic enemy, right? That included these disparate organizations and non-state entities and states and movements from Hamas in Palestine to Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Sunni insurgents in Iraq to the Shia insurgents in Iraq to the Taliban in Afghanistan to the Iranian regime to the Chechen rebels to the Kashmir militants. Essentially, in the Bush doctrine, if you declared yourself Muslim and if you used terror as a tactic to achieve whatever it was your political or social goals were, you were one monolithic, unified enemy. All we need is a snappy name for it. How about Islamofascism? A phrase that means nothing, that has no meaning at all. The problem, however, is that many of these organizations, most of them, have almost nothing in common with each other. They have vastly different ideologies, vastly different goals, completely different agendas. In fact, in many cases, they hate each other way more than they hate us. And yet, by lumping them together into a single category, we created this undifferentiated enemy, which is probably the worst strategic mistake you can make. Number one rule in war, and this goes all the way back to Sun Tzu, number one rule in war, know your enemy. And we had no idea who the enemy was in our case. In fact, we created enemies where there were none. So those two problems, the rhetoric of the Bush administration, the religiously charged, polarizing rhetoric, the conception of the war on terror as a cosmic battle that would be won, as George Bush said, quote, when we rid the world of evil. God? I gotta turn that off, I'm sorry. That conception, which legitimized Al-Qaeda's worldview, plus this idea that what we were facing was just this kind of monolithic enemy of all these disparate groups, you add those two together, and it's pretty clear why the vast majority of Muslims around the world, almost 67, 68% by most counts, believe that the war on terror was in fact a war against Islam. Why do they believe that? Because that's what it was. That's why. Fast forward to a year after the Obama administration, and you can say one very important thing about this man is that he has fundamentally changed the rhetoric of this conflict, so much so that, much to the chagrin of Dick Cheney, he won't even use the phrase war on terror any longer. Why? Because he recognizes this phrase has been so infused with this cosmic drama that it's become a useless phrase. It's synonymous with war against Islam. And it seems as though that it's a small thing. I mean, rhetoric, it seems like it's not that big of a deal. But the truth is that if we are engaged in a war of ideas, as we're constantly told we are, well then guess what? Your words can become your most powerful weapon. And I think there's one thing that you can sort of really praise the Obama administration for, is the recognition that when you talk to people with respect, they respond differently. When you have this attitude of us versus them, you're with us, and if you're not with us, then by definition you're a terrorist. That kind of language does not work in the world that we all live in. And it has made a difference. I mean, this is a man who has gone out of his way, I think, to change the nature of the relationship between the United States and Muslims around the world. It started very early in his administration when he went to Turkey. It's about 2 or 3 months into his administration, if you recall. He went to Turkey and he addressed the Turkish parliament. Actually was there with him during that trip. Not with him, not like we weren't hanging out. I'm not that cool. I didn't see him from a distance. I saw the top of the dome of his head from a distance. And I felt the warm embrace. I was actually in a different city. He was in Ankara, I was in Istanbul. But if you remember this, it's about 9 months ago, 10 months ago, he went to the Turkish parliament. He made this, really historic speech where he said, "Let me say in no uncertain terms that the United States is not and will never be at war with Islam." And the Turkish parliament erupted in applause, and I was watching it in Istanbul in a hotel with a bunch of Turkish journalists, and they got up and they were applauding and hugging each other. It was remarkable. I'd never seen anything like that. Considering that 2 days earlier, when we came to the United States, they did a poll where they found that 89% of Turks had a negative view of the United States. 89%. Now look, let's be frank here for a moment, okay? That region has never really liked us much anyway, okay? But Turkey, I mean, it does not get any more Western, modern, or secular, or for that matter, pro-American than Turkey. And if 89% of Turks had a problem with the United States, there's something wrong. And after that speech, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. He didn't do anything while he was there. He just spoke with respect. He refused to engage in this sort of polarizing rhetoric. And I kid you not, the next day, the favorite dessert on the streets of Istanbul was baklava. What happens when the president's a rock star. It matters. Words matter. If you don't believe me, just look at the way that these Al-Qaeda ideologues, bin Laden, Zawahiri, have been scrambling to try to figure out some way to respond to a president who can say with total confidence, "I've got Muslims in my family. I've lived in a Muslim majority state. I know what Islam is. I'm not going to play along. I will not play along in this cosmic contest that you imagine we're fighting. I won't play." And see, that's kind of important, because the thing about a cosmic war, about a war between good and evil, is you need two sides to play along. When we had the Bush administration, that was a godsend as far as bin Laden was concerned. In fact, we know this for a fact. If you recall in 2004, right before the elections between Kerry and Bush, the elections in which that last few days Kerry went in with a fairly substantial lead. What happened? Osama bin Laden showed up 2 days before the elections, right? He gave that now famous video speech in which he said, George Bush has destroyed America, and this election will finally prove, that he will be destroyed himself. Of course, what happened? I mean, Bush won that election. It was every electoral